My name is Jane Maloney Fowler. I was married at 20 and widowed at 23, and this is my story. I was born here on February 16th in the year of our Lord 1817, and I was named for my mother's mother, Jane Brown Cooper. My father was Robert Maloney, who was born in Ireland and who came here about 1797 with his parents and brothers and sisters. In his day, my father was a pretty famous person hereabouts. The people called him Captain Maloney because he raised a group of militiamen from the Cross Anchor area for the War of 1812. My mother was Catherine Cooper. She was born in Virginia and came here with her parents and sisters and one brother in 1803. My mother's father was Christopher Cooper. He was a Revolutionary War soldier from Virginia, and my mother's mother was Jane Brown, for whom I am named. They've all been gone many, many years now, and most are buried in the north part of the county, around the Cross Anchor area. My father, Captain Robert Maloney, gave 2.5 acres of land for the church and cemetery called Mount Pleasant Cumberland Presbyterian Church. But most folks today call it Cross Anchor Church. Would you like to see pictures of my parents, Robert and Catherine Cooper Maloney, and two of my brothers, Valentine and Robert Dixon Maloney? They sure were handsome boys, weren't they? My folks had a farm at Cross Anchor, but my father, Captain Maloney, was a tailor by trade, so we lived for the most part in town. One day, this young boy, Andy Johnson, and his mother and brother and stepfather came to town in this beat-up wagon pulled by an old blind nag of a horse. They were poorer than church mice. Young Andy and his brother William had been bound to a tailor back in North Carolina, but he was mean to them. So they ran away and they came here. It's been such a long, long time ago now, most folks can't recall for sure. But as far as recollection serves, my father being the only tailor in town, and young Andy Johnson being a tailor's apprentice back in North Carolina, my father took young Andy into his tailor shop. And when young Andy married, my father, Captain Robert Maloney, was his marriage bondsman. And do you know that one day, this young boy, Andy Johnson, would become President of the United States? The local folks here were so proud of him, and my kinfolks called him Uncle Andy. Young Andy's mother, and his mother-in-law too, they were buried right here in this old cemetery. But after Andy became president, they moved him to Monument Hill, where all his family are buried now. Well, anyway, one day the handsomest man I ever set eyes on came to town. He was a young doctor from over there in Cocke County, and his name was Francis F. Fowler, but people called him Frank. I fell in love with him the moment I saw him. We were married when I was 20. On December 28, 1837, the Reverend Isaac Bonham married us, and my oldest brother, John Maloney, was our bondsman. And do you know that young boy, Andy Johnson? Of course, he wasn't so young by that time, made my Frank's wedding coat. And that old wedding coat is on display today at the President Andrew Johnson Visitor Center at the corner of College and East Depot Streets. And you can go there anytime to see my Frank's wedding coat. Well, me and my Frank, we settled down in town. We soon had a son, and we named him William F. Fowler. Me and Frank planned on having lots and lots of babies, but that was not meant to be. My Frank died only 3 years after our marriage, at the age of 27 on October 1st, 1840. And I buried him right here. I was only 23 years old, but I never married again, because I could never love anybody else but my Frank, of course. After Frank died, I received my 1 year's widow's dower from his estate, $150. My oldest brother, John Maloney, and Frank's brother, James Fowler, they settled Frank's estate. There were lots and lots of debts from folks over there in Cocke County who owed my Frank money for doctoring them. And after Frank died, they didn't pay. And it was a lot of money too, about $100 as I recollect. Frank's doctor books were all sold to other doctors from nearby areas. Some of our belongings were sold to local folks. Andy Johnson bought some of our things, and his mother bought a few things too. My father, Captain Robert Maloney, my oldest brother John Maloney, Well, they bought a lot of things from the estate and gave them back to me. And all in all, Frank's estate brought in $1,400, and I was well provided for. I worked some as a seamstress too. Well, some years after my Frank died, me and my boy William, we moved to that new section of town on North Main Street. Our house is that pretty white two-story clapboard house at 312 North Main. Of course, when I lived there, it was just a log cabin. That house was across the street from my sister Emily Maloney Harmon's house, that real nice two-story red brick home. A nice widow lady lives in my house now. Her husband was a doctor too. When me and my boy William lived there, that old log house was much closer to the road than it is now. It was moved further back from the road on blocks of ice a number of years ago. I go back to that old house from time to time just to visit and relive my memories from long times since past. Well, me and my boy William lived in that house on North Main when the Great Civil War broke out. Soldiers from both sides were in and out of Greenville. These were terrible, terrible times, and my younger brother, Robert Dixon Maloney, built coffins for those poor dead boys. My boy William joined up with the Union, 1st Tennessee Cavalry, Company A, and I was worried about to death. William's regiment lost over 350 men, but my William came home safe and sound from the war. I sent William to Nashville to learn to be a dentist, and after the war he came back here and he married that pretty young girl, Anna Snap. Maybe you remember her. She kept that diary during the war years. Funny thing she should marry my William and all, given he was a Union soldier, and Anna's sympathies were for the Confederacy. After they married, William and Anna lived with me at my house on North Main. They had 4 babies, but only 2 lived to see adulthood, Fanny and Lily. I never knew them on this earth because my time came before they were born. I passed from my life in my house on North Main Street at the age of 52, August 15, 1869. My boy William, he buried me right here beside my husband Frank, and we've been here ever since. I have 3 little nephews here, though, to keep us company. My sister Emily Maloney Harmon's little boys, Bobby and Valentine Maloney, well, they're buried right there. And my brother Valentine Maloney's little boy, Bobby Harmon, he's buried just right down there. My sister Emily's little boys died only 4 days apart at Christmas time, and about broke her heart. After those poor little boys died, Bobby Harmon and Bobby Maloney, who are both named for my father, Captain Robert Maloney. There's no other here in Greenville to carry on Captain Robert Maloney's name. Me and my Frank, we don't get many visitors anymore. My son William and his wife and Fanny and Lily, they're buried up there at that new cemetery, Oak Grove. But I sure am glad you came by to see us today. And I hope you'll all come back to see us again. And maybe you could bring me and my Frank a flower when you come back the next time. Why, you can remember where we're buried. We're just right down from those old steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We welcome you to Whispers from the Grave. I am the Reverend Dr. Charles Coffin. My grave is here with the monument, and my wife is right here. Also, my daughter, Margaret, is right here. She married Robert McKinney, and of course she's buried right here. I was born on August the 15th, 1775, in Newburyport, Massachusetts. That's about 50 miles north of Boston, near the New Hampshire border. And if your knowledge of history is there, that was about 1 year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Before I was 10 years old, I had read the Bible through twice. And of course, that was a means of education at that time. But think of that, how many of us have read the Bible through once, and yet at the age of 10, I had read it. Also, at the age of 14, I was admitted to Harvard, where I was educated, and 4 years later, at the age of 18, I graduated from Harvard. During this period of time, our government was going through a lot of formation. That also was during the period of time when George Washington was our first president. 6 years later, I was ordained as a minister of the Presbyterian Church in 1799. And 1 year later, I was here in Greenville. I was teaching at Greenville College, later Tusculum College, under the tutelage of Dr. Hezekiah Balch, the first president, who is buried right over here. I served in the instruction area for that entire year, and the next year, apparently Dr. Balch felt that I was capable, and he sent me back to New England to raise funds for the college. And I spent quite a bit of time up there doing that, and while there, I met and married Susan Eyre, and to our union there were 12 children, 7 boys and 5 girls. And one of the girls, as I said, is buried right here. The next year, I was back in Greenville and was vice president of Greenville College, and held that office until Dr. Balch, Hezekiah Balch, passed away in 1810. But in 1808, I went back to New England to Williams College in Massachusetts, where I was awarded a Doctor of Divinity degree, which is why I am known as a doctor. And that's why I pronounce my name to you as the Reverend Dr. Charles Coffin. When Dr. Balch passed away in 1810, I became president of Greenville College. Held that office for 17 years. At the end of the 17 years, I was asked if I would, and I did, accept the presidency of East Tennessee College in Knoxville, which is today the University of Tennessee. Held that office for 7 years. After that, I retired, came back, and continued my pastorate at Harmony Church. When I was president of Tusculum, after Dr. Balch passed away, I became pastor of the church that he had been pastor of. And of course, when I came back from Knoxville, I reassumed that pastorate in that church. Then I passed away and am buried here in 1853. 21 years later, my wife passed away, and of course she is buried here. One of the things about Charles Coffin and Susan that I'm sure you do not know, and you can carry it home with you, they were the great-grandparents of one of America's foremost authors and a Pulitzer Prize winner for 2 years. Guess who that is? Tennessee Williams. A very interesting bit of history. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Tusculum College is well represented throughout this cemetery. Last year, of course, we had whispers from Hezekiah Balch. This year, you're having whispers from Charles Coffin. I don't know who you'll get whispers from next year, but of course, Tusculum has been a leading institution for higher learning in our area. And it started all in 1794, 2 years before Tennessee became a state. So it's been here a long time. And it's known as the oldest college west of the Alleghenies and south of the Ohio River.
Isn't there a collection at Tusculum that's a Charles Coffin?
There are a number of books that both Balch and Coffin were able to get when they were raising funds. A lot of the people that they would approach for funds would give them books, because that was one of the things people prized so much back then. In fact, the Tusculum College Library now has some of the books of Thomas Jefferson in their library. Mm-hmm. Not many, but they have some.
Where was the Harmony Church?
Right here, where the paving is in City Hall.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. It faced east.
So that's why the cemetery?
Yes, that's why this is called Old Harmony. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What year was the church torn down?
I do not know. There was a house here before City Hall, and I'm trying to think who it was, but I can't remember. But there was a beautiful house here. I remember, even in my young years, it being there. Also, you know, of course, you've got the state of Franklin Capitol right down here. It's a replica, but that's where it was. So you're in a very historic spot here.
Well, why do they have this?
I wish I could answer that. Protection's all I know. You see, you have the wrought iron here and here. You have it over here. I reckon they felt that their bodies would be more secure. I don't know. Any other questions? We're certainly glad to have you here. Hope you enjoy the evening.
I'm Mrs. Wilhoit, and I died on June the 30th in 1873. In one of the most devastating times that this community, your community, has ever had. I had cholera. I had already seen many friends, neighbors, family members dying of cholera. Cholera is a very ugly disease. It is difficult for children to survive and for older people to survive. It starts with a very serious diarrhea. There can be nausea, body functions stop existing as they should. The skin sinks in, your eyes sink in, you become extremely dehydrated, go into a coma, and actually die in shock. Children are more susceptible because with this excessive diarrhea, you could lose a quart of body fluid in an hour. If you live long enough, you can lose 2 to 3 gallons in a day. And in 1873, the medical community was not able to do what I understand it is able to do in this day and time. Dr. Maloney, one of the 2 physicians in Greenville, is probably the person responsible for bringing cholera to Greenville. There were 2 physicians at that time here, Dr. Maloney, a younger man, and Dr. E.B. Smith. Greenville's population was around 1,039. No one knows how many people died in the cholera epidemic. There are estimates of up to 100, maybe even 200. So you're looking at 10 to 20% of the population dying in a matter of weeks. Dr. Maloney had been in Nashville where there were cases of cholera breaking out. He returned to Greenville on May the 24th and checked into the Godfrey Hotel. Shortly thereafter, he became quite ill, and Dr. Smith was called in to see what the situation was and what needed to be done. Dr. Smith examined him and said he had not ever seen, nor had he ever treated Asiatic cholera, but he felt for certain that it was Asiatic cholera. He treated Dr. Maloney. Dr. Maloney was not well for a long time, but he did recover. The next person to develop cholera was a Mr. Pippin, a Mr. A.W. Pippin, who lived just down from the Godfrey Hotel. He got the disease on the 10th of June and died that same day. It was so frightening, people took his body 10 miles out of town to bury it. He was buried in Raytown. They were making every effort they could with their understanding of the disease to protect the people around them. Other people began to get sick. Many got sick, many were dying every day. There were other deaths on the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th of June. On the 19th, 19th, Mrs. Bryson and her child died, as well as 2 or 3 other people. There were records of 5, 6 people a day dying. I died, Minnie Mitchell died on the 15th, and Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell died on the 16th. I died on the 30th, along with Mary Thornburg. And when I was sick, I already knew what was probably going to happen to me. I had watched so many of my friends and relatives go through this and not survive the disease. It was very hard on mothers and fathers to watch their children dying while they too were sick. It must have been one of the more difficult times that this community has gone through. On the 24th of June, a Mr. Ingersoll here in town sent a telegram to Mayor Rule in Knoxville, asking Mayor Rule in the telegram, "One of our physicians is sick and the other is exhausted. Send 2 immediately." Mayor Rule went out and tried to find physicians to come to Greenville to help in the situation. He found a Dr. Tadlock who was willing to leave. The next train to Greenville left within the hour. Dr. Tadlock was on that train. He got to Greenville about 4 o'clock that afternoon, and he and Dr. Smith immediately went out into the county, just out of town, to visit with a Mitchell family that Dr. Smith had been treating. By the time they got there that afternoon, one of the Mitchell's children had died that morning. Another had died within 2 or 3 hours. And when they arrived, they found little Ruth on a pallet on the floor. She was 2.5. She lived a total of 88 hours from the time that she came down with the disease. So there was a family where they had one other child who got the disease but did survive it. There was a family that was almost devastated in just a matter of hours by cholera. They lived up on a hill, and they had a cistern for their water. And Mr. Mitchell had written to Dr. Tadlock after the fact, when Dr. Tadlock was examining the situation and trying to understand exactly